So good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Oh, everyone is almost awake. Again, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
There we go. So welcome to TSS. We're really happy to have you guys here one more Sunday. It's beautiful outside, so it makes even better to have you guys here to decide to stay with us in the morning. So we continue with our lectures, and the theme of the month is the New Testament. And Marco is going to talk a little bit more later on. But before we start, Rafa is going to do the initial reading and the prayer for us. Thank you. Okay.
Morning, everyone.
Morning.
Initial reading for the Happy Life from Divaldo Pereira Franco. The opportunity for moral improvement that life allows us should be taken advantage of widely and immediately. The march of time is inevitable, and an occasional neglect is lost forever. Time and wind never come back. Trust. It's a liberty blessing to utilize every opportunity for inner growth. Stay alert in order to take the most advantage of the hours for your earthly existence.
So let's now elevate our thoughts to our Master Jesus and all the beloved spirits that are present here today with us, and thank for the opportunity of being here one more time, learning a little bit more of Jesus' teachings in order to become better spirits, better human beings in this life. Let's ask them to enlighten our friend Marco, that he may be able to share all his studies and his ideas in an easy way for us to understand. Thank you, so be it.
Good morning, all. Thank you. Nice to be here again. I know for the entire month now, almost, we've been talking about Paul, New Testament, but primarily about Paul, and a lot of things that probably are like not the mainstream knowledge about Paul. For example, the letter to Titus and so many other things that we've learned this month. So we also had a very nice introductory letter about the history of Paul himself, like how he, the story about the way he transformed himself in a different person and the way he contributed to pretty much almost half of what we know about Jesus today, which is all in the New Testament. Well, today I'm going to give you a little bit of a different perspective, because primarily I'm going to be talking in the background of the letter to Hebrews, that's why the title today is a Hebrews masterpiece, and that's exactly how it's called by many of historians. So much so that a lot of people thought that the letter to Hebrews was actually not written by Paul himself, because it's embedded and embroidered with such a deep knowledge, content, linguistic styles, even grammar. They even comment on that, because although Paul was fluent in Greek, he used to write in a very simplistic variation of Greek at the time. So most of his letters before, they would lack the complexity of the Greek language of the time. And this one comes with as a masterpiece in every single sense of the word. Not only because it's beautifully done, also because it's embedded with a lot of emotion, a lot of knowledge, a lot of love. So that's why most of us today believe that this is the masterpiece of these letters. The other thing that it's important to know is that Emmanuel, on the book Paul and Stephen, describes to us exactly how and when the letter was written. So it removes all these doubts, the casting doubts that were put on this letter regarding who wrote the letter for such a long time. So we know Paul wrote this letter. And then, I'm going to give you a little bit of the context of, how everything happened at that time. And that's what we're trying to do today. And, just to illustrate the letter of Hebrews, it's impossible to talk about the entire letter in one session. The letter itself has 15 chapters. And as you know, it talks about everything in early Christianity. Everything. And I'm going to bring to you only the headings of the chapters, so you know what I'm saying. You know exactly how deep, how strong the wording is sometimes in the letter. And I'm going to be talking also a little bit about Paul himself. I'm not going to be repeating over and over what we already discussed in the previous weeks, but also a few other things that are so important for us today. And we'll talk about that in detail. So every time I talk about Paul, I like to show the slide. It's always the same slide. So if you've seen this 100 times, just forgive me, okay? But I think this explains a lot of why we talk about Paul so much, okay? And each one of those little lines represent a trip that Paul took, delivering the message of Jesus, okay? So if you want to look at the scale here, so this little line in the bottom here represents approximately 300 kilometers. See this black line here? This is 300 kilometers. So if you just put a straight line from here to Rome, we're talking about thousands of kilometers. So this is a man that gave up his entire life. And the first description that we have of him, actually, he was about 35. That's when the first time in any book that someone actually describes Paul. He was 35. He's using this white tunic from, the Jewish Pharisees used to use. He was a Pharisee, and he was a very well educated man regarding the law of the Jews. He used to speak Greek, which is quite uncommon for that time. Remember, most of them would not actually speak Greek, although there's a lot of Greek influence to them. So he was literate in both languages. And he has a very marked, strong figure. Like he was a strong man, as the description. So he gave up everything to go around and around and around one more time, and then all the way to Rome, where he disincarnated, just to deliver to us what we have today. And it's so much that the work of Paul is embedded in 13 of the 27 books of the New Testament. So we're talking about pretty much half of everything we know on the New Testament was either written by Paul directly, or written by someone who learned from Paul, or influenced directly by the work of Paul. So that's how much that shows you the importance of everything we're going to be talking about today. Okay. Another thing that's just as a background of before we go into the letter itself, I'm pretty sure you guys will remember from everything you learned about Jesus. He never wrote anything. Not that he couldn't. He could, but he would write on sand, on the ground. He would manifest all his knowledge by his actions, by the parables. Remember that, right? That's the way he used to teach. And it's interesting because I'll just try to picture this, and you try to follow this mentally with me, okay? So imagine if Jesus took this little piece of paper here, like the Ten Commandments. Remember the Ten Commandments? So imagine that he did this. This is the law. He would write this for you, and he'll give it to someone, right? To say, go ahead, do it. So now imagine the power of that individual carrying that little piece of paper, right? Having the word of Jesus written by himself on that paper. Now imagine if someone decides to make a copy of that and change 2 words. And then the next one changed 4 words. And then all of a sudden, what are we hearing today about that paper? It would be completely lost. Or even worse, someone would take that piece of paper, cut a little piece, and give to you and say, you're safe now, because you have a piece of paper that was written by Jesus, right? So the entire message that he taught will be completely gone and substituted by a material thing. And that's what we do. That's what we focus. That's what we understand. Nowadays, now go back 2,000 years ago and think about it, right? So the main reason why he wouldn't really write things as he's writing the law himself, because he wanted us to learn from actions, not from written pieces on wood or rock or something. Because interpretations change dramatically, wording changed dramatically. Even the letters of Paul, the translations lost a lot of things. Even the whole Bible that we know today has lost a lot based on different interpretations, and interpretations influence the translations influence the knowledge, and the knowledge is altered. So the first thing that Allan Kardec tells us, the very introduction, the very first chapter on the Gospel according to Spiritism, is that you can disagree with anything you want in life. You can disagree with what I'm telling you. You can disagree with anything. But one thing about Jesus you cannot disagree with: the law of love. In other words, his actions. Can you disagree that you have to be a better person? You cannot. This is uniform throughout every single aspect of humanity. That's what he thought. See, we're able to capture that still today. And that's exactly why he didn't really write about what he was doing. So people like Paul would do that, because he would interpret that. He would feel the presence of Jesus. He would feel everything he was trying to explain. He would translate in a way that we could get. And then that knowledge will be replicated by so many others. And that's the body of knowledge that we're talking about today, based on the letters. And his work was saved, literally, by many people that, after he disincarnated, started to replicate his work multiple times. And those copies were spread along the way and eventually made up into the Catholic, or the main Christian Bible. That was the first one. But also there are many other texts out there that are not proven, but certainly being part of that same time period. So that's why we're talking about letters. And letters, of course, because you can imagine, like, this is where everything started. Well, if he was in Rome, how could he communicate efficiently with the churches or the religious gatherings that he initiated along the way? Physically, he couldn't. So he couldn't go back every weekend nowadays. You just take a plane, go back, fly, give a lecture, come back here, and that's gone. He couldn't do it, so he had to write letters. And writing at that time is not as easy as today. It's not that I have my iPad here and I can type anything I want and email someone, right? So he would actually, oh, by the way, there's no, there's no backspace. You made a mistake, just like backspace it 5 types and then come back again. No. So everything had to be thought, organized, synthesized, and then written. It's a very different thought process. Nowadays, what we do is quite the opposite. We immediately type. We made a mistake, we correct it, right? But we're not actually thinking about the mistake. We're already thinking about the next line, right, while you're typing. Because our brain is always like a few seconds ahead of our typing anyway, although maybe some of you are super incredibly typers, I don't know. But and then what happens is when you finish the sentence and you read back, you don't like it. Why? Because you didn't really think about what you wrote. You're actually trying to catch up your own ideas while typing. That's what we do nowadays. That's the type of writing we do. And that's really emphasized by technology, right? Some people can still think about the entire sentence before writing. And that's actually quite rare nowadays. That's how we used to write before, right? You think the entire idea from beginning to end, and then you say, okay, this is how I'm going to write this idea, and then you start writing that idea. Nowadays, the opposite. Like, you start writing, and the idea starts to form at the same time. So imagine him writing like a 15-chapter letter. So it's not an easy task. So it took him 2 months to write it. He would write it every day, not all day, of course, because he would work, right? He was a tent maker. He would teach. He would help people. And then his spare time, which was actually not really a spare time, he would actually dedicate to writing letters. And this letter in particular took about 2 months to write. Okay? So this is the background of, what we're going to be talking about today. And it was written in Rome, by the way. And when he was writing this letter, he was actually in house arrest. Because at that time, remember early Christianity, at that time still it was not really accepted. So all the teachings and gatherings had to be, in undisclosed locations, usually underground or hidden places, So, and then when they initially started the first raids against early Christians in Rome, of course they would be killed, as you remember that, and very grotesque ceremonies of people being slayed and slaughtered and murdered by animals or fighters or whatever they had in hands. Like anything, it would just literally be a circus, but in a negative way, a circus of death. So he was in house arrest, so he couldn't leave, so he was dedicating himself a lot to this. So there are many people that describe this, Emmanuel including, and Emmanuel, what the comments on his book is that they felt that Paul, every time he was writing this letter, he was very emotional. Or either he was crying, or he was in a type of presentation that's characteristic of a mediumistic encounter type of. Not that he was a medium, but he was certainly being directly influenced by something very, very bright and divine. So that's how they describe this scenario. So I just want you to know exactly what was happening. So here's Paul writing this, influenced by elevated spirits, and in this incredible emotion, and he was transcribing that all into paper at that time. So that's a lot of power. So when you read those words, even nowadays, you can kind of grasp a little bit of that emotion that is coming directly from his hands and from the divine. Okay? All right. So let's see. This is just the way he starts, okay? And this is one of the fundamental changes about the letter of Hebrews and everything else we knew at that time about Jesus. And I'll explain you why in a minute. So this is what he wrote. So in the past, God spoke to our ancestors. So he was Jewish. Remember this, right? He was still Jewish at that time. But it's that now there's this little, he was a Pharisee Jew. But there's this transition time now happening, is that all the Jews at that time, they were debating whether was Jesus another prophet that came to add on to all the other prophets that spoke to us in Judaism, or is Jesus something different? Just think about it, right? Let's say, I'll give you an example. In Spiritism, there are many well-known names in Spiritism that are able, through their mediumistic capacities, write hundreds of books to us. Let's say that another one comes, and this new individual that comes in within Spiritism, or any other religion per se, brings a completely new set of ideas, but not really destroying the law. He's not saying like everything you know is completely wrong, get rid of it, this is the new thing. No. He's just saying like this is what you've known, and now I'm going to expand you into a new world of knowledge, right? All of us will be like, what should I do with that? Should I take it? Should I discard it? Should I blend it with what I know already and say, okay, this new knowledge, I just blend with what I know, so I'm still a Jew. I still do everything I know by the law, but I also believe in a few things of Jesus? Or should I look at Jesus and say, Jesus, you are different. You are the Son of God. You are the one that I'm going to follow. Can you see that debate in the minds of all these people? Because there's no one out there saying, God, listen, guys, this is Jesus. You understand that? Jesus, he's the brightest spirit that ever been in this universe, in this constellation, right? No one was telling them that. So they had to kind of get that idea from the environment, right? So that's exactly what Paul is addressing. You say, in the past, they used to talk about ancestors because these are ancestors of Abraham, and they were called Hebrews, right? There are 32 passages that are talking about Hebrews in the Bible. So they talked to the prophets, and many times in various ways. And we know that, right? How many different ways prophets would deliver the message at that time. But, this is the change. See, but, in this last day, he has spoken to us by his Son. Can you guys see the dramatic shift? Because he does not talk about Jesus as a prophet anymore. He actually tells us, like, this is the Son of God. In a way of manifesting that this is probably the closer you are ever to understanding what God is. That's why they used to use the terminology Son of God all the time, right? We know all of us are creation of God, but this is a paradigm shift on the knowledge at that time, because he's writing to his old fellows, right? The Hebrews. And he's telling them, guys, listen, he's not just a little add-on of what you guys know already. This is new. This is something very, very important. Okay? So this is the first time in the New Testament that Paul directly addresses that change in thought, which is now, listen, this is Jesus, this is the Son of God, and we should certainly follow his ideas, right? So that's what he's saying to us. Okay, so with that in mind, so these are all the headings of the letter. As you know, there's a lot. Lots of warnings, which are valid today, by the way. Warning to pay attention. Does that make sense? Jesus made fully human. Does that make sense? The reason why is that, listen, people could not believe a son of a carpenter that lived in this tiny little city, tucked in, away from the well-known Pharisee clans, could possibly be a prophet or the Son of God. That's what he's called. So he had to explain to them that he's fully, like, he's a human, but it's not human at the same time. Can you guys add that? Because if he tell them, like, this is a human being, he's just delivering a message, okay, just like a random carpenter, people would say, bah, that's exactly what they did. Like, all the Jews at that time, they would say, this is absolutely impossible. I'm expecting a king. A king cannot be a son of a carpenter, period. Right? Are we to think the same way? This way? Exactly the same way. It did not change over 2,000 years. Right? I'll give you an example. So, let's say that you don't know, let's say you think about someone that's very, has a lot of money, a lot of power, a lot of knowledge, and if he walks in here right now, but he just dresses up as like a random guy, we would probably look at him and say, oh, you're just a random guy. Like, you cannot possibly be Bill Gates, right? You can't, because you just dressed up like me. That's how we think. That's exactly how they thought. How possibly you're Jesus? You're just like a carpenter dressed up like a carpenter, doing carpentering stuff every day, right? Talking to fishermen who doesn't know how to read, like going in a boat and going to fish with them. That's not kingdom. That's not a king. You're not a son of God. Come on, tell me something different, right? So that's exactly how the Hebrews were thinking that. Remember, Jesus is now disincarnated for a while, okay, for a few years when this letter is written. So the Hebrews were actually starting to say, you know what, maybe Jesus was not that important anymore. He was a great guy, but I'm going to go back to the Jewish law again, okay? I'm going to consider Jesus, but that's okay. That's as far as I go, right? That's exactly what was happening. Not only for the Hebrews, but for everyone. Like, the early Christianity was a turbulent move. So now, at least most of us, can actually go back and say, okay, I do believe that Jesus was the brightest, most evolved spirit that ever got close to us. We all kind of agree with that now. But at that time, they couldn't tell. particularly because we judge people by the way they show up, the way they look, right? We always do that. Now today, same thing, okay? And then just to prove that one more time, say in another chapter, he describes how Jesus is actually greater than Moses. Now, this will generate a lot of pushback, and you guys can see why. And this is probably one of the times where they start to delineate what early Christianity is, what Judaism is. Because at this time, Christianity does not exist. I know people are shocked by this. But it didn't. All we had are Jews, like Jesus, like Paul, like everyone else, that believed in Jesus. But they're not Christians. In other words, like they're not really forming a whole institution separate from Judaism. They're like a sect within that body of knowledge that was considered Judaism at that time. So they're all Jews, right? They're the Gentiles that are not Jews but also believed in Jesus. So the early Christianity is formed by multiple different sets of individuals that collectively believed in Jesus, but they were not organized in a way that say, okay, this is what Christianity is. That never existed. Okay? So they shared knowledge, and that's all. There are no rules, there are no sects, there's no titles. Okay? So Paul is not the Paul. This is Paul, the tent maker. That's his. Paul, tent maker. Now, I'll go back now to this part here, a warning to pay attention. Let me give you an example. So what's the new trend in Spiritism now? Do you guys know? Giving titles. Yeah, I'll give him titles. So now we say, this guy's coming to give us a lecture. He is a Spiritist speaker. Okay, so he's a Spiritist speaker. That's his title. Okay? Which now puts him in a different category. So he's not a Spiritist. He's actually a speaker. Right? Or he's a Spiritist, leader. I've heard that before too. He's a leader in Spiritism. What does that mean? Seriously. Are we different? That's exactly what Paul is addressing. Exactly the same thing. So see, things are recurrent. And now, I'll give you another example. If you go to Facebook or anywhere and you start to search like Spiritist groups or anything, you start to see ads, like posts of people with very nice smile. You should take a picture now. With very nice smile, and normally like very nice dressed up with a suit and stuff, and his big names and big letters and stuff, and say, Spiritist something, which would be Spiritist. In Portuguese we say expositor, which is like he's exposed, like he delivers the master, right? So we always with a title on that and say, this guy, he's coming to your city. Okay, come and see him. He's like a star, right? Not to say that some of them are very nice individuals. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that we are now, unfortunately, moving into a believe in this guy type of movement. Right? That's exactly what was happening there. Exactly the same thing, right? Because they were drifting away from the basis of Christianity, which is actually basis of we're all equal, we're all very simple and humble individuals that need to learn and grow. Like I said, Paul, he's a tent maker. Jesus was, a carpenter. Most of the apostles were fishermen. They never called themselves, I'm the apostle. No. On the contrary, they will move along with like half of a tent making equipment on the side and like probably a little donkey on the other side carrying on some supplies, walking along 400 miles at a time, right? And saying, guys, listen, let's get together. Let's talk about Jesus, right? That's what they used to do. So that's the warning to pay attention to everyone, okay? Not only us. Every religion does that, right? Every religion may be directly influenced by the idea that we need titles, we need differences, we need people that are higher than us, we need people that somehow connect us in a nicer way to something which is above us. Like that's the knowledge that's been embedded, embroidered in every single religious movement in the world. And we're not different. Okay? We're not different. Another example. I know writing books in Spiritism is a great thing. A lot of what we know coming from books that are collected directly from many mediums and all that. We know that. But what about, someone had, like just say, okay, you know what, I'm going to write a book, and not that I'm different or anything. I'm just going to write a book about Spiritism, and I'm going to sell it, okay? And now I am a Spiritist author. See? I'm not Marco anymore. I'm a Spiritist author. So that makes me a little bit more important, right? Because of my title. See the titles, how they start? That's exactly how it starts. In a few minutes, like in a few years, in a few decades, you're going to start listening this, oh, he's a Spiritist preacher or something, like he's a Spiritist entity or something, like you'll see that happening, unfortunately. That will happen. Like it happened to every other religion. Anyways, so that's the warning that Paul had here, and that's completely valid to every single one of us. Okay? Okay, see, here we go. And by the way, this letter has 2,000 years, okay? Just going to... So, warning against unbelief. Do we believe? Do we believe in Jesus? Are you guys sure? Even when you're in trouble. And you don't question, why is this happening, Jesus? You never say that. No, of course not. Because you're complete believers. So you believe that everything that happened has a purpose, has a reason, and it's perfect, aligned with the laws. It doesn't matter. Just stop crying, move on, deal with it. Right? This is believing, isn't it not? Like this is exactly what they're telling us in the books. Read the Bible 100 times, get the idea, this is what you gotta do, period. Right? Are we there yet? No. We believe a lot when things are doing really well. Right? We're like, wow, I'm like a super believer. Oh my God, this is amazing. When things happen, then all of a sudden, your tiny seed of faith that you have just like disappears. And all of a sudden you're like, I can't believe it. Jesus, where are you this time? That kind of, God, you left me behind kind of thing. This is not believing. You're not believing. That weakness shows you that your faith is like it's less than a seed. Because remember, if it was a seed, we were kind of moving things around. Remember the mountain stuff? Yeah. So that's the warning against the unbelief. And why was it written at that time? Because again, remember, it was a turbulent time for many people, and they were thinking, well, wait a minute, maybe we should. Okay, so Jesus was teaching that. Like, it was great, but you know what? I'll just go back to exactly what I was doing before, and I'll have Jesus here somewhere, his thoughts, but not so much. They started questioning. Obviously, you can imagine, like, there's people from both sides saying, forget about this guy. He's nothing. No, the prophet, like, he cannot. So, for example, I'll give you an example why people disagree with Jesus. One of the reasons, like there's 100, but one of the reasons they mainstream Judaism, like Pharisees, disagree with Jesus so much that they believed in resurrection. Pharisees actually believed in life after death. That was not a problem. Pharisees believed in that, but they believed that only at the last day of the hour, the last day of the universe, that all the souls will be resurrected at the same time. Remember, they were going to the gates. They had to go and they opened the gates, and they were all crossing into eternal life. They still believe in that. So why Jesus did that before them? So they could not take it. Like, why Jesus resurrected before all of us? That's not right. This is not the law. This is the kind of questioning that they had, and it's a valid questioning for them because that's their faith. So, everyone that believed in Jesus was like, oh yeah, that's right, maybe I should not believe in that much. That's right. Why was he resurrected? Yeah, forget about it, So that's exactly what they were talking about. Like, warning against the unbelief. There's some direct warnings to a lot of them. For example, the Sabbath rest for the people of God. And this is something that was part of the culture at that time. You have to take a day off. This is very there's a very cultural aspect of this, right? So Jesus, the great high priest. Remember that, and this is addressed directly to Jews, right? Because remember, the high priest at that time had the law. He had the knowledge. He was the effector of the law. So he could judge. He could say what's right or wrong. He would teach. Like, he was the last word on Judaism, right? And you remember the high priest was the last word because the high priest was the one that sent Jesus to jail. Remember? So he was the one that said, this is what's going to happen. To a point that the Roman representative fell for it and said, okay, I'll take it. I don't want to deal with you. He did it, right? He sent Jesus. And then he had double thoughts about it. He offered the other guy, and then they decided, remember the story, right? They decided to send Jesus to the grave. You know how the story goes. But the high priest was the one that really condemned Jesus first, he said, So he's saying that, forget about all you know about the high priest, because what he's saying is that what Jesus tell you is actually this is what high priest means. So he's the one telling you the truth, right? Not this guy that's telling you otherwise. Because what he's saying here is similar to what he's saying here up above, is that don't believe in that guy. Don't believe in whatever human figure calls himself high priest, because it cannot be right. What he's saying is very simple. Okay? We are all fallible individuals. We can fail. All of us. Anytime. Right? We are direct ancestors. So we are in a evolutionary line of civilizations that fail many, many times. So we have a high tendency of failing individually and collectively. That's what history tells us. Right? You don't need to go into details about this because it's quite obvious, right? We're learning. We're not saying that we're worse than we were before. I don't think that's the point. But the point is that we're still in the process of learning. So any human individual that rises up and tell you, like, I am the Word of God, you can't be right, because they're fallible. They will eventually fail. They will eventually break from the law of God, even if they had beautiful intentions. So don't believe me. That's exactly what I'm telling you. I'm serious. Like, you believe in Jesus and what he wrote and everything we know about the body of knowledge. But if you have questions about what I'm telling you, great. Please disagree with me, because that's exactly how we evolve. Question things. Right? We should. Always. I don't have the knowledge of the universe whatsoever. I'm far away from that. And all of us are. So it's what he's saying is that be careful with that, right? Just every time you have a question with your high priest or whoever you're following, if like the Instagram Spiritist, whatever, just saying, no, maybe I should just go back and read Jesus again. Maybe that's a good idea, right? If someone's telling you otherwise, just double check. Go into the gospel and say, does that make sense? So does that make sense? Just keep that questioning mind always, right? And go back to Jesus all the time, because that's the best knowledge we know, right? That's what he's telling to this guy. Okay? Warning against falling away. That's the same idea, right? Warning again, going back to the same path you were riding before. And that's valid for all of us too. We have very different backgrounds coming in from very different directions and going different directions anyways. But just go back, just be careful not to go back to mistakes you've done in the past. Because the idea is that we should move on from mistakes, right? That's what he's saying. The certainty of God's promise. So again, a warning again towards faith. That's the same idea. Melchizedek, the priest. So he now, it's interesting because he's talking directly to Hebrews, right? So the priest, so that's Melchizedek, he is a high priest. Like, he represents a body of knowledge and all that. So he's now drawing a line between the high priest and Jesus and saying, now listen, like, Jesus is this guy. Like, Jesus is the high priest. The same idea. So he's writing direct. This is a very specific warning targeting Hebrews at that time, right? So again, same idea. They go in a line. So the high priest of a new covenant. So that's Jesus, right? So he's the high priest of a new body of knowledge that links you directly to God. He talks about worship. He describes what the blood of Christ means, and that's a tradition that, for example, the Catholic Church and other churches took directly the word from it. So they say, the blood of Christ is actually really like the blood of Christ. You drink and you forgive your sins and all that. But if you look carefully at, and I actually invite you guys to read this passage, actually what he's talking about here has nothing to do with blood itself. It had to do with the traditions at that time. Remember that it was very common for Hebrews to offer animals to God, to appease God, or to, forgive their sins. So they thought that the act of, getting a sheep or an animal that represented something very docile and not aggressive at all, like there are no sins and all that, they thought that offering that to God was actually taking away their own sins, kind of. That's the idea they had before, right? They would paint with with the blood, the headings of the doors at that time, so it would show that they would protect from evil spirits. There's a lot of very interesting traditions at that time. So he's taking advantage of those traditions and say, if you believe that the sheep or the goat is actually the blood of that animal is taking away your sins. So now Jesus, representing the Son of God, he, by his death, is actually taking away everyone's sins. That's what he's saying, right? So it's literally, he's putting a parallel between these two images. But he actually never talks about the blood of Jesus itself, right? Now, you can read it and take it literally and say, okay, so if I drink the blood of Jesus, then I'm totally fine. It's actually, and that's the idea that he was opposed to. It's like, no, you're not fine. Right? Just do what he's telling you to do. That's how you're fine. Right? Anyways, so it depends on how you read it. But if you read it, please, you understand what I'm saying, is that if you take it literally, it will be kind of silly and funny. Anyways, so the Christ sacrifice once for all. So his sacrifice is incarnating this planet. Right? Now, think about how difficult it is for Jesus to incarnate here. Just think about that. No, Jesus is the spirit that participated in the formation of a galaxy. He's the governor of everything around here, the planets and all that. He really helped shape and create everything we know, even where the satellites can go and our radio signal emitters can sense. He coordinated all those efforts. So he's been around for a long time. You can see that. So now, to help us out, this very incipient 20,000-year-old set of individuals, right? That's human race, right? Individuals that inhabiting this very transitional planet. In other words, like we're not like that in the bottom, but we're not that far yet in the evolution of things. So he said, you know what? I actually gonna incarnate one of those bodies and help these guys, because if I try to show up like a light or something, they'll be like they'll not get anything, right? So I'm gonna come in as a human figure, because that's the only way I can actually talk to them and they'll understand me, right? This is a society where not too long ago they believed that not the Jews, and just be clear, because they're the only ones that broke with the tradition at that time, but the other people would still believe that, the sun was a god, and the plant was a god, and there's some type of godness and everywhere, and there's different gods for this and gods for that. Those are the Romans. Remember that, the mythology of, So this particular people were ready for this because they believed in one unique, all-powerful, almighty God, right? So they were ready to understand this message. But they were not ready to understand the entire message. So the only way they could do it is actually if he comes in the human body and shows up and say hi, right? I'm serious. Can you believe, like at that time, like if you collect those 5 fishermen in a boat and you show up as something magical and thing, show up and say, listen guys, this is what you guys got to do now. They're gonna be like, what? I'm out of here. I don't know what you are, but or they will say, oh, let's go to the boat every day and try to find that God in the boat. So it's going to be the God of the boat now, right? So that's how things would be. unless they would come in a physical body and talk to them. This is phenomenal. The amount of work that has to happen in the background spiritually for this to happen is just I can't even grasp the complexity of it. Incarnating one of us is difficult enough, right? Now think about Jesus himself. Anyways, all right. So a call to persevere in faith. Okay, that makes sense, right? So again, it's one of the chapters. Faith in action. Did you hear about this? Yeah. So now, faith in action is the main theme of Spiritism. The main theme of Spiritism. Because at the very beginning of everything, Kardec, the first thing he tells us, okay, was his compiling the knowledge, the body of knowledge representing Spiritism that we know today, is that, charity is faith in action. Right? And then without faith or without charity, there's no salvation. There's nothing. Right? So that's exactly it's exactly the same thing that Paul was telling them at that time. So God disciplines his children, the laws of divine laws. So he's talking about the divine laws in a way that they could understand. Action and reaction. So he describes the law of action and reaction to the Hebrews. Is it advanced? Oh, I can even think about it. Like we're talking about someone describing the law of action reaction 2,000 years ago using a piece of paper, jail arrest, making tents and writing to people that didn't even know how to read. Think about it. And here we are, hearing the same thing. Not coincidence. I can tell you that. So he's telling that, listen, you are going to go through some hard times. It's your own decisions. That's what he's telling them. You break from the law will come and get you. That's that simple. There's no options, right? You can make things easier, for sure, even if you make something completely wrong and stupid. There's always ways to, make things easier in the future. But eventually you have to catch up with that. Right? You can make it worse, you can make it easier, you decide. It's always you decide, right? Warning, another warning. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 warnings in the same letter. Okay? Warning and encouragement. Because of course he didn't want to say guys, you guys are doing a mess, forget about it, you're never going to make it, right? So he can't finish the letter like that. So he's saying warning and encouragement. So I have a little liner on that too. So he's going to say there's a warning, but also encouragement. See guys, you are transforming everything we know about Christianity. So take the lead on that. That's what you're saying. That's what he's saying, right? Take the lead on things. To us, right? So the mountain of fear and the mountain of joy, again, he's talking about the fear of going against a system that's telling them that what you're doing is wrong, right? And the mountain of joy is the consequence of it. I'll give you an example. Let's think about a family. I know many families like that, so I can give some real examples. So there are at least a few families that I know that very traditionally trained, educated in a specific religion. Doesn't matter which religion it is. I don't want to be. I'm not talking about the other religion. I'm just talking about ours. So, and all of a sudden, something breaks into that cycle, and someone decides to not follow that particular tradition. Right? So there is a mountain of fear that arises because you're going against someone that you love and you admire and you live with. But at the same time, you cannot go against the principles of faith that you believe to. So there is a clash between your faith knowledge, right, and your relationship in the corporeal world. Okay? That happens very often, right? And eventually what Paul is describing is that never be afraid, so the mountain of fear, never be afraid of following Jesus. Never. Should never be afraid. It doesn't matter how bad it looks if you do that, right? It doesn't matter. And he can say that, by the way. I don't think I know how many times he was stoned I don't think we know that. Probably, I think even Emmanuel missed a few, if you think about it. Because he would be stoned and pushed out of the cities, and people would threaten him with anything they had available, right? For the only reason that he was telling people to love one another. That's all he was doing. He was treating everyone the same. That's exactly what he was doing. Because remember, in Pharisees, they could not do that. So the God was particular to them. And you have to do certain things to achieve him, right? So he was clashing directly with that, saying like, listen, everybody's the same. We should hug one another, have the word of God inside our hearts, and make a good life of ourselves, right? To make something good of our lives. So this is exactly what the problem here is, that he can tell us, like, don't fear it. If there's one person that can't say that, he's the one. He's been through everything. And he's still writing about Jesus. See that? So, of course, I'm not saying like, okay, guys, so you get out of here right now. When you cross the street, you're going to be a new person. You're going to be 100% with the law of God inside your heart, and all you're doing is perfect things. Of course not. But he's also the example of that, because look at his life. Like, he's made a lot of mistakes in life, and he talks about his mistakes in his letters to teach people. So he moves on from what he's done. So that's the message for us. You've done something wrong, great, move on. It's time. You still have time, even if it's 2 seconds. Even if you repent the last second of your incarnation. We know that. The spirits will tell us that even if that happens in the last second and you move on and you try to do something different, that will take in consideration. A lot of people saved years and years of pain reincarnations because of that single fraction of second. So do you have an issue with someone? That I'll tell you, go fix it. Because that will come back at you. For sure. We know that. There's no way of going around this, right? Okay. So, concluding exhortation. So, he exhorts people to continue in their faith and all that. And then he finds the benediction and the final greetings. Of course, he ends in a very good note. So, we're running out of time. But I'm going to just... I have like tiny sentences from some of those sections so we can, emphasize the message. So, for example, when he's talking about warning to pay attention, I think I'll put that in my fridge. So, warning to pay attention, because I need that. So, we must pay the most careful attention, therefore, to what we have heard, so that we do not drift away. That's for us too. Okay? And the reason why, because there are many, even Spiritism, so I'm bringing to Spiritism all the time, because obviously I know more about it, but, bringing to Spiritism, we in Spiritism have a huge tendency of drifting away. Okay? And drifting away means, because we have the ability to think about Spiritism, which a lot of people cannot do in their own religions, right? So we can question, we can think, we can go and read, we can get information, we can actually learn ourselves. Like we can do, it's not that I'm here teaching you what to do, on the contrary, right? So you can go out there, get the information, you can process it, synthesize it, and say, okay, this is what I understand. The problem with that, though, is that obviously, if your faith is not steady, if you don't really know what Jesus is really telling you, you can start to go in a little drift line and say, oh, well, maybe we should incorporate this. Oh, maybe we should incorporate that. Or maybe we should start to bring crystals here and put crystals in people's heads and do these miraculous light things and move chairs around, because that's super cool. Yeah, I agree, it's super cool. This is not Spiritism. You can believe in that, I don't have a problem with that. But drifting away as a movement of the body of knowledge is very serious. And that's what the Hebrews were doing at that time. They were drifting away back into the Pharisaic movement. Right? Oh, you want to learn the word of Jesus? You have to be circumcised. Remember we talked about, I think it was Marco Magalhaes that talked about this, that they had a clash with Peter because they were even to a point that they had to have a meeting with Peter and say, Peter, okay, so you deal with the Church of Jerusalem, and I'm going to go and I'll be the Church of the Gentiles, because I cannot have people circumcised to learn the word of Jesus. That does not make any sense. That happens in Spiritism too. Believe me. Yes, it does. Like, oh, no, for you to do this, you have to do that. Oh, you have to be like this. Now, there's Spiritist Center telling you what to wear inside. I've got an email this days ago. Okay, a lot of spirit centers from all over send emails to me sometimes, and they're like, oh, we're starting this policy that we cannot wear this, and that in the Spiritist center. I'm like, okay, great. Why did you come with that? Is it because it's winter you can't wear? No, because it's not appropriate. It's like, wow, it's not appropriate to hear the word of Jesus because you're wearing a skirt? There you go, you Pharisee. You're doing a great job. That's exactly what they're doing. Oh, for us to bring that table, we have to put a white blanket on top of it. Have you ever heard about this? Oh, the fluidified water, can't put it in the fridge. It's bad. The fridge has like this massive bad spirit inside it. We'll go in and I know, you open it at night 2 a.m., you open the door at 2 a.m. like some, oh my god, don't even tell me. Oh, you pray, you have to cover your eyes. Yes, there's spirit centers that do that. Believe it. Maybe you guys don't know, but there is. Oh, you want to participate in this? Oh, you have to do this type of prayer, you have to do that, you have walk in the day, you have to do this, and you have to put like a black chicken in the corner and then just chop the head off of it and put wine on the ground, there's a lot of traditions out there that you guys don't know, but it's crazy. Yes. So that's exactly what he's telling you. So do not drift away from the message of Jesus, period. It doesn't matter where you are. You can be here in the Spirit Center, in an Orthodox church, in a Buddhist temple, whatever you are, it doesn't matter. The law of God and the message of Jesus is always the same. It's inside of you. Does it matter the way you look? Seriously? We're over this, right? I think that's what we need to take. For since the message spoken through angels was binding, in other words, a contract. See? It's a binding contract. And every violation of disobedience to receive it is just punishment. In other words, like if you break the contract clause, you're going to receive a punishment. That's a very simple explanation of the divine laws, right? 2,000 years ago to people that couldn't even read. See? All right. So warning against falling away. Okay. So we have much to say about this. Oh, I betcha. Paul himself, he had a lot to say about this. But it is hard to make it clear to you because you no longer try to understand. See? They don't want to learn anymore. We sometimes have that. It's like, that's okay. I'll go to the center on Sunday, we're going to We're going to the Spirit Center on Sunday. I got to pass. That's it. We're done. Right? We're done. I did my duties. Right? You no longer try to understand that we're here not because we're just here, having fun and having passes and all that, and have 20 minutes that we focus away from things, and a nice spirit will come and do some magic on you. That's not that. This is an ongoing process of self-development, building knowledge, and being a better individual. It never stops. So don't go back into your old mistakes. He told you that in the beginning of the letter. Don't go back to your old mistakes and start believing that if you do this and this and that, you're going to be safe. Wow, like they used to do in the past, I'll be the church. I'm the nicest guy to God ever, right? I just built the entire church. I paid for the bell. That's how they used to believe in the past. Okay? In fact, though by this time you ought to be teachers, we ought to be teachers, all of us, you need someone to teach you the elementary truths of God's word all over again. So by the time you think you're really ready to be a teacher, they were not. They actually had someone teach you the very basics of God again. Because those are the ones we forget. We try to be so excited when someone comes here and tell you this fantastic story about this spiritual obsession that received this crazy treatment and someone healed from this disease. Everyone here is like, wow, that's amazing, right? But then I ask you, forget about that. So what do you have to do today to be a better person? Elementary truths. Isn't that true? In Spiritism, we do this every single time. We tend to fantasize this idea that if someone comes here and tells this magical story about these phenomenal things that happen, that we're like, whoa, this guy has to be an amazing person. But, this is fantastic. I love Spiritism. This is not Spiritism, by the way. So the magical part of Spiritism, it's gone for a long time. It still exists for a very particular purpose in the Spiritist Center. But the phenomena is not present anymore. I mean, we know why. We should be mature about it, okay? All right, let's finish it up. So, all right, so I'll just focus on one. So this is one of the, like a psalm that he has inside the letter, so we don't need to worry about. Now let's read this. Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as his children. We are children. Are we children of God? That's exactly what he's saying, right? For what children are not disciplined by their father, are they not? Can you be more clear than that? If you're not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, he puts into like marks, stars, okay? Everyone undergoes discipline, either if you like it or if you don't, okay? Then you're not legitimate, not true sons and daughters at all. If you think you're going to escape from paying what you've done, like seriously, just think about it again, right? And there you go. So therefore, that's the tail end of it now. So therefore, since we were surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, because now he's talking about the body, like so many religious gatherings he developed himself that are later called churches, right? Let us throw off everything that hinders, right? And the sin that so easily entangles, right? Because it tangles us, like it prevents us from moving, right? And let us run with perseverance and race marked out for us. We have a little race to run, okay? And this is now not from the same letters, but I think it's a great way to end, okay? This is not from the Hebrews, it's actually from Thessalonians, but from Paul also. Rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances. He's like the way he writes, like it's you can't really argue with that, right? He's straight points, like do this, do that, do this, right? For this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. Do not quench the spirit. In other words, do not lose your spirit of faith, right? Do not treat prophecies with contempt. It's like, this is like beautiful, this is God's. But test them all, right? Go for it. Read it. Learn it. Hold on to what is good. Reject every kind of evil. Every kind of evil. Okay? May God himself, the God of peace, sanctify you through and through. All right. That's it, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you, everyone. So we have a couple minutes for questions. If anyone would like, yes,
Yeah.
please.
If he wrote to the Hebrews, why did he get in Greek?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So he writes in a very polished Greek because he's writing to Hebrews, but he's using lots of people along the way to get the letter to them. So whenever he's finished writing, so there was an individual, I forgot his name now, but he makes copies of everything, and then those copies goes to whoever is close to them, which many of them were Greek speakers, right? And then they were supposed to take like their message to the area. So when I say that he's writing the letter to the Hebrews, it's actually not taking the letter, putting on a little envelope and delivering to them, like go read it. It's more like he's moving a body of knowledge towards that message and to Hebrews. So when they get there, it's going to be passed on in whatever language they have available. It's just that because he communicated well in Greek and he had so many people communicating in Greek alongside him, so that's the easiest way for him to communicate. But that message will be moved from people to people until it reaches every corner of his, the entire map that you saw, right? So in the end, like think about the letter as a body of living knowledge that's kind of moving along people. And being replicated in every aspect of. So he writes to Hebrews, but as you can see, the message there is not specific for one church in Jerusalem, right? It's actually designed to every single one, and that's why he wants to spread that way. That was the reason why, because it was much easier to do it that way in Greek to so many Greek-speaking people around him in the area, and Greece too. He had churches in Greece too, you know that. Crete, for example, right? And that's the idea. Yeah.
Anyone else would like to ask a question, make a comment? Anyone online? No? Yes, go ahead.
Yes.
You said that
Yeah.
he could not believe someone that was a carpenter
Yeah.
began
Yeah.
bringing some kind of important message to the
That's right, yeah.
Jews. But they have the history before because they had a shepherd that became king.
For sure. Yes.
So how come they didn't connect?
That's interesting. That's a very good question because, yes, I'll repeat the question. So they could not believe a carpenter was the son of God or the king at that time, right? The king that would bring the message of God. But they believed like like a pastor, like a sheep herder that became the king, right? For example, have many examples like David and many others. The prophets had also a very common professions at that time, right? So and the reason why, because at that time the knowledge. So in the prophets in the Old Testament, right? So the knowledge was not synthesized in the same way that was synthesized around the time of Jesus. So around the time of Jesus, the whole different sects of Judaism had developed very standardized ways of thinking. For example, the Pharisees is a good example, right? So they believed in a very specific tradition, the way they behaved, the way they talked, the way they interpreted the law. So they could not accept certain things. For example, even the Samaritans, for example, had a very different way of thinking, right? Even so that Samaritans would much more close to accepting Jesus than the Pharisees at that time, right? If you think about historically. But the main reasons why Jesus never behaved like what they expected him to behave. It's not only he was a carpenter, right? But he behaved as a simplest, humblest human being ever. He never proclaimed himself in a show-all type of environment, like this is the way I'm dressed. I have a crown on top of my head. I'm dressed all in white. I am the king, right? Opposite from that, he stayed on his line from day one to the way he discriminated. And the other ones before, for example, even the ones that became king, physically king, they accepted the culture of kingdomship, right? So they invested themselves in their appearance, and that's what the Pharisees wanted, right? That's exactly what they wanted. They wanted them to behave as one, right? Yes, exactly. Fight. Well, remember that. What happened to Judas, right? In the fight, he wanted to fight. Everyone wants to fight. Peter wanted to fight. Everyone wants to fight when Jesus was arrested. Like Judas even what we call betrayed, but actually he wanted to expedite things by initiating a revolt because the king was there. See, they could not get the idea that this is the opposite of Jesus, right? And that's what really created a big clash for them. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you everyone that joined us online. Hope to see you guys next week. So we're gonna now get prepared for the passes.